Two, one. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Riley Lewis Show. I am your host, as always, Riley Lewis. Joining me today is a very interesting guest that I've had on before, actually at a different network, but I'm very glad that he's back. It's been too long, Mr. Alec Cordero.
Hi, how are you doing?
It's so good to have you here. I'm very
Thank
excited.
you. Thank you.
So, we have a ton to talk about, and I just want to jump right in. I want to know where you would like to start, though.
Um, hmm.
Right? I mean, I could pitch you some ideas and we could just roll with it and
Yeah,
see if that gets some other things going.
yeah,
Let's
that'd be
just,
great.
okay, well, I would love to just talk broadly, I guess, about not just the actual virus, but
Uh,
all of the narratives, theories, new things that have come to light, the response around the world and here, maybe in your own life. But I would love to just talk about that for a little bit. Um, I just feel like it's a good place to start. There's a lot there that we can dig
mm,
into, and I
yeah,
would
no, definitely.
and I'd love to have your interpretation of maybe a little bit of the timeline. I'm not sure, like if you started noticing these things right from the beginning that we were talking about before, or if it took some time. So maybe your experience with the virus, following all the stories and stuff, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, pretty much my thoughts on kind of the virus, the movements that have been going on lately. So I'll just start pretty much with, the coronavirus. So I think it's a real thing. I think that it does kill people. I think that people get affected higher rates than the flu. Statistics show that. So I'm totally for that. I'm not arguing against that at all. I just feel as if it's kind of a coincidence that the coronavirus is happening, and then this Black Lives Matter movement's happening at the same time, and certain figures in the world are contributing to the Black Lives Matter movement, which you've never really seen, I guess, come out as being partners of, I guess, Black Lives before, anything like that. So let me just start with the coronavirus. So I believe that the coronavirus is a way to, like I said again, it's a real thing. But I feel like it's a way to go from a unconditioned response to a conditioned response. Starting with the coronavirus, wearing mask. So I believe that wearing a mask, the statistics are there that it actually helps you not give out the coronavirus as much as if you weren't wearing a mask. But I feel as if you don't necessarily have to be wearing it outside. That doesn't really make much sense to me. I feel as if wearing the mask too could lead to respiratory issues. I'm a soccer coach, soccer trainer, and I've noticed that when I run around with the kids and I'm wearing my mask, that I it's harder for me to breathe. Rather, if I didn't have my mask on. There's studies that say that you have the same amount of oxygen coming in, and you might have the same amount of oxygen coming in, but you're kind of just circulating the air within your own body rather than circulating outside your body within the air. And so I feel as if the masks are kind of a way to go from a unconditioned to a conditioned response, like Pavlov has talked about before. I'm sure you've talked. I'm sure
I
you've.
mean, yeah, Pavlov's dog, absolutely. You would
Yeah, you've heard.
salivate at the sound of a bell, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So
That's right. At
so
the
you.
sound of the bell, the action happens. That's the thing. And I'm sorry, I just want to get in and kind of provide some background. Because I think we were both found something interesting where we were thinking at some point, is any part of this perhaps a test to see how far people will go in order to be compliant with authority? Maybe
Yeah.
I'm misreading that, but I think there was maybe a little bit of that in there. So the
Yeah.
mask wearing has become a political symbol. So something for like a conditioned response, maybe they want to know how well can we condition the American people to do something at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, and I feel as if, like you said,
Yeah.
it's definitely going from a unconditioned to a conditioned response. So we start out with the mask,
So
which
what did
is, you know,
you, if I may, what did you notice? Because I don't really know those terms as nearly as well as you do. So what made you notice? Like, what are some of the key elements of a conditioned response as opposed to an unconditioned
so
response?
unconditioned response is, say, I ring a bell at you, you come to me because I ring the bell, I present the food, you eventually start salivating. So that's an unconditioned response.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
do that over and over and over again, say 10 times. Eventually, when I ring the bell at you, you're just going to start salivating without even seeing the food
Right.
because you're going from an unconditioned to a conditioned response.
I see.
Um, and same with the mask. So we go from, being skeptical of the mask, people do it, people just follow it without really thinking too much into it. And then the next thing we start having these trackers on our phone. I don't know if you've noticed the new trackers for the COVID on your phones. And
Contact tracing?
what did you say? I'm sorry.
Is it for contact tracing?
Yeah, and
Allegedly. Which we can talk about, allegedly.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, right, okay. I was not
and
aware actually that they had done that already.
yeah, and
Okay.
it's supposed to be for our safety, which I believe that safety plus security equals control.
You hear about Hong
Uh,
Kong? You hear what they say about Hong Kong and Beijing?
I've been hearing about what they've been doing
I
over
mean,
there,
just
but
the,
if you
well, so just the basically, we'll just go through this really quickly, but basically, for 160 years, I mean, for like 300 years, England owned various parts of the West and the East, including in parts of India, right, and then also parts of Asia, including the port city Hong Kong. So after about 160 years of British rule, they came to an agreement with China to give them back Hong Kong, basically. And the Chinese government agreed, but Hong Kong still had their mini constitution and their own judicial system. So they agreed in 1997, at the time of the handover back to the Chinese government, that we will respect a one country, two systems model for 50 years until 2047, at which point we will revisit that contract with Hong Kong. And in 2003, they tried to pass some sedition, so not being able to speak, criticize the government. Um, one of our best rights here is being able to speak freely about our government. Every day, I'm reminded that people have the First Amendment because they let me know how I feel, and I genuinely would prefer that than living in a place where you're not allowed to by law. I mean, I would much rather live in a place where people can freely say what they want about who's in office. That's important. So the point is, though, they've been encroaching slowly over time, and recently they've been guising their the slow takeover, arresting of people, stuff like that, with a national security law, because Hong Kong's a sort of Western or international port city, and there's bad influences being brought in into China that threaten Beijing. So the point is, they're basically quashing that model, according to like many activists over there, including Joshua Wong. I don't believe he's been arrested, but many other activists have been arrested, journalists being arrested, and they just call it national security. So that scares me because people wonder why I get nervous when I hear that kind of term, because other countries have used that to really crack down on people as a blanket. We're doing this in the best interest of national security, and sometimes that means your rights are taken away, and so and they're not returned. So it's a slippery slope. I mean, I don't know. So, but here's what I'm really interested in: how have your conversations been going with like family and friends about the mask? It's become such a political symbol. I'm wondering if they've gone well, if they've gone poorly, if you have a mixed feelings yourself, like.
yeah, so obviously I've talked to my parents about this. They obviously know they have the same beliefs as I do. It's funny because we've never talked about it before this whole coronavirus, kind of our beliefs about the government, about
Sure.
security. control, all that good stuff. But I just started noticing little trends. Hey, like, why is everyone wearing a mask even when they're outside? That's kind of weird that they're kind of trying to condition the people to always be wearing these masks. You can't see their facial expression. You can't see people smiling. You can't see people, being sad. I feel like it's kind of a psychological warfare in a way. You're kind of taking away from people's emotions. And if there's no emotions, what is there left? Logic? But even, do you have logic anymore? Do a lot of people have logic anymore? I feel like there's not a lot of common sense anymore in the world. And I feel as if you take away the emotional side, I feel like people are going to get so angry because they can't see those certain emotions, and they can't process, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
What are you trying to point out? Something I think is just something. I mean, for sure, number one, people are going to listen to this, and someone's going to criticize it and say that we should be wearing masks at all times, like around. And I think that's interesting. And I wonder, like, do you have folks in your life that come up to you and say stuff like, "I think you're not being cautious enough," or and to those people, what do you say? Like, without judgment, I'm really just interested because in my life, I'll get strange looks from people if I'm not wearing
Mhm.
my mask in the car when I'm alone. And I think, okay, that's a little ridiculous. I wear it in a grocery store, but I'm in my car alone. I mean, let's take it easy. I just think sometimes, but people, really take their convictions seriously when it comes to politics these days. So I'm just wondering, like, have you lost
Yeah,
friends over this, or like, you know?
yeah. So I'm a soccer trainer. As you know, I'm a soccer coach.
Definitely.
I have to wear a mask the whole time when I train these kids. I have to be applying alcohol to myself all the time, or hand sanitizer, to go with the regulations of the
Right.
county, regulations of the state. I've had certain conversations with friends where I try to just provide evidence, but they don't want to hear it. And when certain people don't want to hear things, there's no convincing people. If someone's really set on belief, if someone thinks that the sky's orange, you go outside and it's blue, it's okay to let them think that it's orange. I think at that point you're gonna kind of have to just step away and let them believe what they want to believe. Because I believe that if you know what's right, if you're doing what's right, even when 99% of people are doing what's wrong, I feel as if it's okay to do what you're doing. And I think us having that good conversation on, when you messaged me about all of that good stuff, I think
Totally.
that a lot of people get so defensive when people will not necessarily criticize, but ask questions why you believe a certain thing, rather than exchanging ideas, exchanging information, which people should do instead. Because the more you exchange information, the more you exchange ideas, the smarter both of you guys are going to get. It doesn't matter, if you believe that, you believe in Buddha, if you believe in Christianity, it doesn't matter. You can learn, certain values or certain stories or certain things from that other person, and you can become a better, smarter person, after all those. But one thing I have noticed is I have certain people in my life that I can't argue with about this whole mask thing. Since I'm employed by certain people in my life, I can't really argue too much with them about
Okay.
all this mask stuff.
Right.
So there's sometimes where I have to hold my tongue and kind of just let it be how it is. But if people ask me my opinion, I'm gonna totally give them my opinion. And I've noticed that a lot of the older folks that I've been talking to, especially in the region of Marin, I work in Marin for a lot of soccer. They know what's going on. They're very woke, I guess is the word. So when I bring up certain things like the mask, I don't know if you just heard about we're having a low coinage in the nation. I guess the government's running out of coins, which I believe, this is just my own belief, is that they're trying to go from the money currency to either cryptocurrency and credit cards. So they're able to track people and track transactions, and so we can have a higher level of security plus control. They're gonna bring it out as, oh, we're just, we're being safe. We want to take away the criminals. We want to take away, the drug dealers. We want to take away, human trafficking, all that stuff. But in reality, I feel like it's a way to control people more. Just like these masks, you introduce the masks, and then you introduce the cryptocurrency, and then they're going to introduce the vaccines eventually. And the vaccines, I'm also kind of a little hesitant at, because I believe that Bill Gates has some sort of foot into the pie, I guess I'll say, in the vaccines. And you can look it up yourself, actually, but there's a patent by Microsoft. You could totally look it up. I forgot the patent number. Look up patent, look it up Microsoft body sensors, and pretty much there's a way to now give shots, and I guess there's a way to implant some sort of sensors in your body, which transmits it to say Microsoft, and they can kind of see what's going on in your body, read your temperature, and that's all they'll really say about it. But I'm sure that they can do more of that. They can track your movement, track your transactions, track who you hang out with. So I think that this coronavirus is kind of just the start of that unconditional response to eventually just track and control everybody into a conditional response. And I think the way they did it was perfect. I won't say it's the government. I won't say it's the elite leaders. I'll say whoever it is. But I think it's a way, like I said, to go from an unconditioned to a conditional response without people really even thinking about it. Because a lot of people in the world are, I hate using this word, but sheep. They just kind of go along with the flow, and they think it's for the safety of the people. But in reality, it's for more control of the bigger guys and the bigger women up there with the big money. So
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we both, I think, are really interested in because there's something going on here that I think is quite interesting. Let's follow the timeline of events, right? We're just over halfway through 2020. So let's just follow the chain of events going all the way back to Jan 1 of 2020. So we start with a very, very partisan impeachment attempt, and our news focuses on that. About a month later, we start focusing on some really not really the virus yet, but let's fast forward 2 months later to March. We start talking about the virus. Andrew Cuomo says we have to send old people back to their nursing homes even if they're positive. Hospitals can't handle it. 40% of their COVID deaths are in nursing homes. The media is calling him a hero of the Republic. My friends on social media are posting memes with Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio, who are both responsible for one of the worst parts of the outbreak in the United States. And they're heralded. Then we take 3.5 weeks off, and if you mention them during the protests where people are shoulder to shoulder in the street by the thousands, then you're insensitive. And then as soon as those end, we have a spike in cases, and they try to blame it on states that reopened back in May. But if Texas opened May 1st, and we didn't start seeing a spike until June 30th, don't you think that might have something also to do with the fact that between May 25th, the day George Floyd was murdered, and June 30th, there was non-stop protests, and some people literally seized a part of Seattle?
yes,
But we're not allowed to talk. So, I mean, the world I'm living in now is the world where the guy who is responsible for butchering this in part, Andrew Cuomo, is all over my social media, and I'm wondering, do people not do any further research? Do they just look at the daily briefings and they just go, but they don't realize that's the guy who really did botch this in the beginning completely. So I mean, not like he's not the only person, but I just think it's interesting that these elites, if you will, for lack of a better word, don't just make terrible decisions, and then we have to live with the consequences. And some people are still convinced that they're the right decisions, even after they've. So I just don't understand how could you I just don't understand how you could even get to a place where it's like, yes, thousands of us were in the streets, but that did not contribute to the increase of COVID. Also, in New York, we're not allowed to ask you if you test positive if you've been to a demonstration. So we're not even allowed to track the information. So we're not even allowed to track the information. I wonder, like, is any part of you also just nervous that people will go from stocking up on toilet paper to not thinking about it at all to being scared about it again just on a dime? Like each time they move, the puppet things change and it goes along with. I mean, because we could get really conspiratorial and think, what are the companies that really made money on this virus? Because there are some companies that really made some. I mean, and obviously there's also some competing hypotheses about the lab leak as opposed to the wet market, and so it's just a lot of this is starting to seem spooky. I mean, you must be really concerned, right? Like psychologically speaking, to watch this large of a number of people just turn on a dime. Does it concern you?
Yes, it concerns me, and I feel as if the media has really contributed to the fear in the people. And the best way to
Definitely.
control people,
Yeah.
the best way to control people is to instill fear into people. They will do anything you say to do if you instill fear and you
Yeah.
instill that obedience.
Is that
Obedience.
is the fear thing like our reptilian, primal from 100,000 years ago thing that's still left over? Why? I mean, is why it shouldn't be that easy? You'd think in a rational world it'd be like, wait a minute, we have grocery stores and a post office. I don't have to. I have an Xbox in my house. I don't have to worry about like. But it's that it must be that leftover from, the Neolithic age or whatever, the prehistoric ages, right, where there may have been an actual threat around you all the time.
Yeah, no, definitely. It definitely comes from that. Back in those days. Yeah, it definitely comes in that, and
I guess it's
it's
just
just
like left over, right? It must just be one of those things we held on to weirdly, because you're
yeah.
right. You get people scared, and that's it. Their whole world. I mean,
And I like to I hate comparing it to this, but you think of Hitler with the Jews.
sure, absolutely,
Like I said, I hate touching on that topic, but
right,
Hitler with the Jews, it was all obedience. But why did they obey Hitler? They were fearful that if they do not obey,
right,
Hitler was going to kill every person that disobeyed him. So they said, you
yeah,
know what?
right,
We are going to obey him. We are going to, turn in every Jew there is. We are going to, be on your side, because if we do not do that, then we will be killed. And so they went from being, a regular group to the inside group, while the Jews were the outside group. And in psychology, when you're part of the in group, you will do anything to stay in that in group. But you do not want to get to the out group, because if you are in that out group, you will get dismissed, you will get put out in society, you will even get killed. So I think obedience has a lot to play with what's going on in the world right now. And I just see people that are obeying these certain laws, these certain regulations, that there's no thought put into it. And it's just scary how the world just it doesn't matter like what's going on. Oh yeah. Well, everyone's wearing masks, so I'm gonna wear a mask. Oh yeah. Everyone's getting tracked, so I need to get tracked. Oh yeah. Everyone's getting a vaccine, so I need to get a vaccine. Oh yeah. We're gonna do all credit card transactions so we can take away criminals.
right,
It's just there's no thinking going on. You're just so easily swayed, some of these people in the world, and
yeah,
I feel bad. I really feel bad, because I know how they're getting easily swayed, because they're listening to the news. They're on Instagram all day. They're on Facebook. They're on Twitter all day. And that type of stuff is not good news. That's not the
right,
truth. That's just the surface. But if you look down to the roots of it, you will see the real causes of all this. You will see that the elites are trying to install fear into the people so that they follow their certain new world agenda, so they can get what they want, and they can clear out the people in the lower income society, and that they could divide the races. And one thing, about they want the race is to divide it, and they
For
want,
sure. They want another civil war. They want us to
yeah,
redo the Civil War. I mean, I firmly believe there are some people who are race baiting so hard because they want another civil war. And
yeah,
instead, they want it to end in the complete dissolution of the Union, such that
yeah,
it's never the same again. And, we could talk about this because you get the psychological part. I don't really, that's not my world, but philosophically, this isn't surprising to me at all, considering where things have been going and some of our more cultural elements. If you look at a lot of the work of even just Hegel, there's a clear master slave dialectic he had where he said that basically you have a conscious being, or I should say a self conscious being, that on its own thinks that its own measures of the world are objective. But then when it meets something else, there is a complete change where that person's views are objective and theirs are subjective, and that's inherently threatening. And so basically, this was the stage for modern conflict theory because, that would bleed into, this idea that all of history has been class warfare. And if we were to run with that idea from our dear friend Karl Marx, that all history hitherto has been history of class warfare, then it's interesting that, I mean, because honestly, I do think, to his credit, in some point, I think what we're seeing now is in some ways, a media-induced or baited war between classes. And when we have a society that's also academically experiencing a new birth as far as something like intersectionality, we have an infinite number of ways to divide ourselves based on all sorts of new labels. So we've just basically artificially created so many labels that can now be used to further divide ourselves. So at this point, I'm afraid that we're going to start resegregating ourselves and say, Seattle, this is a place for no police. St. Louis, this is a place for police. And they're like two different places completely. And it's just not even a union anymore. It's like Fortnite. Whoever happens to have or Arma, whoever happens to have a setup there has a setup there. King of the
yeah.
Hill, and I don't want to live in some King of the Hill / Lord of the Flies / Animal Farm. I want stability and peace
Yeah.
and quiet. So I guess what would you like to see change? I mean, how can we stop this avalanche before it's just too late?
So I obviously see that they're trying to defund police, which I completely agree that we should not be funding police as much as
Sure.
we can, but we cannot completely take out police because if we completely take out police, we will bring in a military state.
Oh,
No
yes, you're right. You're
police.
right.
It's either a military state or it's a police. What would you? I would rather have police any day because military they can bring in martial law whenever they want.
And if I
They can kill.
could, yeah, well, you're right. And I would rather honestly have the funding just be used more appropriately. I'm all on board with training officers much longer than if 21 weeks or 8 months is about right. I mean, I'd love to see that extended to between 2 and 3 years and let them really soak it in and go through drills and on the street and even do like an internship. You spend 6 to 8 months on the street with someone who's already an officer, just observing, shadowing, and then you finally, because I think that, you know, it would just be a lot better if we had police who, upon responding, actually knew how to talk to someone who's grieving, handle a hostile situation, a hostile environment, not set anyone off, just treat people like a human. Some of the videos we see for sure, it's just like one of the things for sure is just treat people better. Uh,
Yeah.
some of these videos really you can't deny it. It's a video, and some of the I mean even the treatment of the two kids that were coming back from a rally in Atlanta and they bust in the windows. It's just like, I mean, you're busting in their windows. They're being compliant. This is completely unnecessary. So there's definitely, you definitely, that's another area. I think we're more aware of some of the power as far as that goes, because it's interesting that we definitely will say like this part of the government's bad, but if the other part of the government says wear a mask all the time, people like wear it in the shower, wear it when they're sleeping, like so it's just interesting that sort of dynamic where the government that's just anyway, it's just an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, and touching off that point, I feel as if, like my roommate, for example, he wants to be a police officer.
Oh
He's,
wow.
so I've had some interesting talks with him, and he's gotten his criminal justice degree, which I think every police officer should go to a 4-year degree. I'm not saying college is perfect and it's going to make you smart, but it definitely instills some values in certain disciplines, because if you go for 4 years, that means that you're a dedicated human being.
Right.
And so, he did that. He did it. He's going to do an internship as well.
There you go. Right. Train.
And then he has to go to the academy. I think that you have to go to a 4-year degree. I think you need to go to the academy. I think you need some psychology training. I think that the type of training that, say, social workers get or therapists get, I think that there should be some sort of courses or some sort of work that they need to complete before they're able to get a gun.
Definitely.
It's ridiculous that you can go straight out of high school and go to the academy and go get a gun. And how long is the academy, if you could remind me?
I think 21 weeks.
21 weeks.
Which is 20 less than a year, yeah.
And we have psychologists that they have to go to school for 4 years. They have to go to another 2-3 years of their master's, and then they have to go to 4 to 6 years for their PhD. So that's a total of 11 to 13 years for a psychologist when they're just talking to people about their mental issues. And they have to go to 11 to 12 years. And police officers go for less than a year? That's ridiculous. And they have a gun on them. Psychologists have a gun on them. Right. They just talk to people and listen to people, and it's so ridiculous how underpaid even psychologists get paid. And the police get paid, they start out at $70,000, $80,000. And a lot of police I see, they do it for the money. They don't, I hate saying this, but they don't do it because they want to protect and be safe and all of that. They just want the money at the end of the day. They want their pension. They want to have a secure job. And if you're thinking that way, if you don't know the why behind you're doing a certain job, if you just go in because you're making that money, you're gonna be so sick of your job. You're gonna hate your job. And what is that gonna do to other people that you work with? You're gonna be a horrible officer. Just like
the reason at risk, right? I mean, you're gonna be risking people's lives at some point if you're an officer that's negligent, right? I mean, or you just
exactly
like it. That's literally what's happening. I mean, George Floyd lost his life because some officer did not let up. And we have that clip forever. And he has to live with that for the rest of his life, knowing that some guy was gasping for air and people heard it and the whole world heard it. I mean, that guy has to live with that for the rest of his life. And I hope that he really thinks hard about the consequences of his actions. Because that is someone who's not with us anymore. Right? Like that's a human being who's not with us anymore. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think that if you don't know the why behind you're doing a certain profession, so I'm a soccer trainer, I'm a soccer coach. The reason why I want to be a soccer coach and a soccer trainer is because I want to be a good mentor to the kids on and off the field. I want them to learn good morals towards men and women.
For sure.
I want them to be complete human beings. I don't want them just to go play soccer, become professional soccer players and all that. That's great if they do. That's beautiful. But it's more than just a game. It's about living life. It's about showing people who you really are. It's about the good morals, the good values. Because if you don't teach them those certain things, you're failing as a human being. If one of my kids that I train comes back to me in 5-10 years and says, Alec, you installed some great values in me. The way you taught me, the way you talked to me, you were so patient with me. You never yelled at me. You're only positive with me. That makes me feel great. That's all I need at the end of the day. So at the end of my life, when I'm on my deathbed, I know that I helped that one kid, which will turn into 10 kids, which will turn into 20, 50, 100, 1,000.
Yeah, it's a ripple.
And if you're not making that difference in the world, I just feel like you're not really living life if you're not helping other people. Because you give out in the world and you're going to receive it back and more. Say I give you $100. I don't expect anything back, but I know that I'm going to get $300, $400 just by doing that certain little gesture. And I think that if if more police officers thought that way, I think that we wouldn't have such a corrupt system, and I think that our system would be revolutionized, and I think that we would have a new system in place rather than just pulling your gun out on someone and telling someone to stop resisting. Of course, they're going to resist. Do you think you want to go to jail? Of course, nobody wants to go
Right.
to jail.
Nobody ever. Yeah.
You just shoot somebody because they're resisting. That's ridiculous. I mean, like, what kind of thought process is that? You're literally a horrible human being if you think that you could just shoot people when they resist. Like, you should not have a job. You should not be part of society if you think that way. You are a horrible human being, and this is the truth. And I hope that people get rattled up when they hear me talking about these certain things, because this is the truth, and the truth sometimes is ugly, but the truth always comes out eventually. It doesn't matter when, where, what place it is, but the truth always comes out.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry.
No, I agree, and I was just gonna say, it's times like these where I definitely tell people this is why a lot of my default is skeptical of the government generally, and just period, because every once in a while the media will focus on something like this and expose, or someone will record something and expose it, and it will remind people that 5 minutes ago the government we thought could run everything for us, now we want to fund it. So I just want people to really realize, let that sink in and realize, do you really want to trust this government to do everything that you might think? Because it seems like we give them a badge and they can't even handle that sometimes. So do you really want to trust them at the end of the day to make sure that, I don't know, my dad has cancer right now and it's aggressive and it's stage 4. I don't trust that a government program would be able to give him the kind of care that he needs to keep going, because it's so intense and so aggressive, and truthfully it's quite expensive, and somebody at somewhere is going to have to pay for it. And
Exactly.
I just don't think that I think this is indicative of a larger problem of the government's. I think they've become unable to articulate or meet the needs of the people overall, in my mind, period. I don't know where to go from there, but I think that the sovereign is no longer able to articulate the needs of those who are governed. And when those who are governed are no longer consenting to their government, it's time for a change. I just don't know what that change looks like exactly, but I know the levee's going to break at some point, regardless of what I want. I mean, I can see the writing on the wall. The levee is going to break, whether or not I want it to or not. It's going to happen at some point, most likely in our lifetimes. For real. I mean,
Yeah.
most people are still reeling from 2008, and then as soon as they're getting back up again, we tell them to shut down their business. And then as soon as they open up again, we're going to shut it down. And all you get is one check for $1,200. People are going to start starving. People are going to literally start, going down to their bomb shelters and looking for canned goods. I mean, when the line at the food bank is longer than the line at the DMV, things are problematic. And I'm very nervous about what this place is going to look like in 15, 20 years if we don't have someone come in soon that is able to articulate those needs.
Yeah, and it's just ridiculous because I'm very skeptical of our governor, even Gavin Newsom. So he's shutting down all these small businesses, but I don't know if you've seen, but he has a winery in Napa. It's open for some reason this weekend. It's open.
You saw the deal with China, right, for the masks? The $1 billion deal he made with.
I didn't know. I did not.
Oh, okay. I'm sure you also know he's. I'm sure you also know he's Nancy Pelosi's nephew, which is a great way to get the job because she was mayor of San Francisco in the '70s, then he was, and now he's. So it's.
I know.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I know. Cool. Yeah.
Right on.
One of my, I can't even say his name, but
Okay.
one I know knows their family and talks about them all the time. So
Right on. You're in the inn. That's very cool, actually. Wow. I'm sure you know more than I do.
That's okay.
Yeah. Well, there was. I mean, I just wanna double check it, but yeah, I believe. Yeah, I believe he made a $1 billion dollar deal, basically. A $1 billion, yeah, mask deal, yeah, medical mask deal. Sacramento, he made a mask deal with a Chinese manufacturer. The company succeeded in obtaining federal safety certification. Yeah, okay. So it's some supplier for the N95 masks, clearing the way to receive over 150 million masks. It was a part of a $990 million deal, so nearly 1 billion. Distributed to medical workers and other front.
Wow.
But yeah, so yeah, no, I mean that's just
News doesn't cover that. It is crazy.
yeah, exactly. I just think just like I mean some any other story that doesn't want to get talked, if they don't want to cover it, it's not gonna get covered. And if it's not gonna promote that fear and keep people coming back, then that's the real thing. You gotta I definitely realize a lot of these media organizations would be out of business themselves if we didn't have a clearly just a clearly inappropriate in a lot of ways president. Like if there wasn't so much to talk about with our president, then I wonder what the media would talk about otherwise. Like if Hillary Clinton had got it, I wonder if they would talk about this even more because there's no other thing in the room to talk about. It'd only be this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they'd have less to talk about, frankly, coming out of the White House. So I wonder if it'd be even more focused on the Rona. I know this. In my life, there were people who went from never watching the news to talking about Fauci daily. And I think it's interesting that the only thing that made them, that galvanized them was the fact that there was something to be afraid of. Not because it's like there's an election. It's an election year. No, that's not it. Impeachment. Nope, that's not it. Oh, Corona. That's it.
Corona.
Yeah.
Corona. And
So,
then it's from bat soup. From
yeah,
bat soup.
that's right.
That's crazy how they've been eating for thousands of years and it just pops up all of a sudden.
I
That's
mean, I'm not sure if you've heard like Brett Weinstein talk about this, but he's actually gone over some of the biological aspects that would make it seem unnatural, like it was not birthed in nature.
man-made in a lab.
Right. That's what he was suggesting that the lab leak idea that came out of the Institute of Virology in Wuhan is starting to seem more plausible because there are some ways about the virus, the way it behaves, that seem interesting, that don't seem like they would make sense. Here's an example of one of them. So when a virus is new and it's newly introduced to humanity, it's not great at going from host to host and knowing exactly what to do on that new tundra, if you will. Which is thankfully why we don't have outbreaks all the time. Thankfully, we've got rid of smallpox or polio. People don't have iron lungs when they're 15 anymore, thankfully, like they did 100 years ago when we had polio. So, but at first, viruses in some ways are not great at effectively transmitting and then doing their job with each and every host. But this virus, it seems like is. In some ways, he thinks it may have been enhanced, or there may have been a genetic mutation or some splicing where it was enhanced in such a way that it almost basically was like a level 2 or a next gen virus already, and it didn't have to go through that first evolution of just being introduced. It is basically behaving like it had already been introduced to the human body, and that's weird. So that makes some evolutionary biologists think it's weird that historically viruses don't behave like that when they're first introduced into humanity. It usually takes like a wave or so, a generation, until it's able to really do that. I'm not an evolutionary biologist myself, but Brett Weinstein is, and he's a very good one. And his brother's an MIT mathematician, and they both have a podcast. So people go look this up because this is an evolutionary biologist. So unless you are too, he knows both more than both of us about how the human body responds to this stuff, and he thinks that it seems very plausible that this came out of that lab. Um, Especially if you really think about the way it was talked about in the beginning. I mean, we had people saying, let's gather in the streets for Chinese New Year, and then 2 weeks later saying, you should wear a mask, and how dare you guys for gathering. And then again, the media is like heroes of the republic, and this is why people get so frustrated, because the media acts like they've been totally one narrative about it the whole time, when really they covered it up in the beginning. Then they blamed us for not acting soon enough. But then they didn't focus on it at all for like 3.5 weeks, and now they're talking about a spike. So it's like, don't pretend like you've been talking about this every day, without disruption and saying the same thing. It's been mixed messages over the long course of several months and weird developments. That's my biggest thing, is that I think people point to charts. They put up charts on their Instagram stories and they're like, Europe, US. And I'm saying, like, I'm over here like looking at studies that show number of cases identified goes up, but the death rate's falling. And I'm wondering, so why are we so I mean the recovery rate is like 98%, 99%. So it's like, why are we like, people don't want to talk about that part. They don't want to be like, oh wait a minute. They just say, but new cases, and it's like, but also recovery rates 99%. So it's just one of those things for me where I think, I mean, at some point, some people just want to make money on this. Netflix is probably very happy.
Oh,
Xbox, Microsoft, all these companies are probably, Amazon's probably thrilled because their business skyrocketed and they were already topping Apple. So I'm sure Amazon's very happy about what's worked out here, and meal delivery services. I'm sure they're all hyped about the
I
increase.
even bought from Amazon actually during this time. So I mean, I even contributed to it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. No. I mean, no. I get it. It's just, I think it's
yeah.
funny that at the end of the day, what really might have happened is just a lot of people made a lot of money. We may have just kind of behaved oddly for like 6 months and just lost some time in our lives, and I don't know what we have to show for it. Like, I don't know if there's some major change. It really feels like people just kind of stocked up on toilet paper for a few months,
Because that's really smart to do.
which
Really.
is definitely what's going to get you around. I mean, nature has toilet papers. Use a leaf. That's all. Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway, so I mean, I kind of want to. I feel like we're wrapping this up a little bit. But I want to hear. I mean, I'd love to hear just like how you're feeling about one last thing, and that is just um, what are you thinking? Like even past this election, like I guess like what are you looking for in a leader? As on this topic of authority, leaders, what are you looking in a leader that would make you trust, in them?
so obviously, the less about a government you can have in my life is the better. I don't need to be regulated.
Right.
I don't need to uh, be
Of course.
taxed as much as I'm taxed, because all the work that I do for my job is me going out there, busting my butt, sweating, working with the kids, and so that's one of them. I think that free speech is another one, which we have free speech, but we
Yeah.
kind of don't at the same time.
Yeah, sort of.
Uh, Another thing is,
Have you ever had something removed from social media by the social media platform?
no, but
Because
so
I have.
oh wow, I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
I have. Yeah, no, that's why I ask. I'm just curious because I actually have, and it's so
Uh,
annoying when you publish something and because you're not deemed their authoritative source, you don't get to participate in the conversation. And
mhm.
so I've had them like they were even doing stuff where they'd shadow ban people talking about coronavirus if they weren't, like one of the legacy media stations in cable news. Independent journalists couldn't talk about any of these theories for a while just because they get shadow banned. So I've had like stories removed from Instagram. I've had comments like removed, and I think to myself, it's just it's just what's frustrating is that these rules don't universally apply. Like Twitter doesn't take down all death threats; they just take down some of them sometimes.
That are
And
opposed to the government.
and then they say, "Well, we're just such a big media site; it'd be so hard." And that's true. There are a lot of tweets every day, but it's like if you're gonna make it a rule and enforce it, then universally apply your terms and conditions. Don't just selectively apply them when people peer pressure you and the media into doing certain things. Like, so that's my beef with it, is just that they don't universally. Like people say things that maybe I've even said and they get away with it, or they say things that are, maybe inflammatory and it's totally cool, but I want to make one point that's not like well made or something, and just it's taken down, and it's like, okay, well, I see who holds the power here as far as the flow
Yeah,
of information.
yeah. Another thing that I would love to see from our next president or person in charge is our budget drastically needs to be changed. We need to stop funding the military as much as we do. This is coming from a guy my dad worked for, Lockheed Martin, which is a subcontractor
Defense contractor. Yeah.
of the military. So that's coming from me.
Yeah.
I think it's horrible. I think that it's horrible that we have no say in our tax dollars being thrown into the military, where
Absolutely.
their budget is literally whatever they want. If you want overtime on the weekends, go for it. My cousin was in the Navy, in the Navy Reserves out in Georgia, and he literally told me, yeah, so we would have a bolt made for the military. It costs $50. You could get the same bolt at Home Depot for $1.
Yep.
Same material, same everything. It's just military grade. Yep. So I think the budget is just so off. I think our education needs to go way up. It's ridiculous how low our education is. I mean, teachers have to pay for their own supplies. That is ridiculous. We have the same concept of learning that we did 200 years ago. It is just like, what? Social workers are now needed more than ever. We pay them like shit, and we expect them to do a good job. How do those two things balance each other? I think the police budget needs to go way down, and that there needs to be more, like I said, social workers, therapists put in place rather than the police. I also think that I'm not a big socialist economy guy personally, just because I don't think that someone who goes to school for 12 years should be making the same amount of money as someone who works at McDonald's or someone that works at Taco Bell. That's my own belief. I think that people that go out and go make their dream a reality, I think that they should be rewarded, for their effort and their effort. And I personally don't think that college should be free either. These are just my opinions. I think that it shouldn't be free because I just think that there's so many systems put in place right now that if you do come from a lower income, there's so many scholarships that you could get now, and there's just so many ways to get to that area that you want to get to. And if you just give college to everybody, then that means that instead of a high school degree being the base, now it's going to be a bachelor degree. So that means that everyone's going to have to go get a master's degree to have a bachelor degree, and the PhD now is going to be the master's degree, and it's just going to keep stacking. And I just think those certain things should not be set in place. Like I said, I don't think going to college makes you educated. I know some people that went to college and they're idiots. They have no common sense. But I think those
I also know some people who never went to college who are very, very, very smart.
My brother, sorry for bringing this up, but my brother, he got his degree in psychology. He had his PhD paid for. Probably smartest dude I know. Smartest dude I know. Self-educates himself, reads all the time, takes courses. This dude brought in last month selling solar. He made $100,000 in a month.
Wow.
Selling solar. This dude has his bachelor degree.
Wow.
And it's funny because people that, go to business school, I'm not ratting on anyone, but they'll just be like, oh, like, why didn't you go get your, PhD if you got it for free? And my brother just laughs. He's like, dude, you don't need your PhD to do anything. You literally can make yourself anything that you want to be in life as long as you self-educate yourself and you apply yourself. Absolutely. And you put in that hard work.
You can go as deep as you want in anything. Absolutely.
Anything. Doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
You literally could be the poorest person in the world, but if your dream is to play soccer at a professional level, you're going to play soccer for 4 or 5 hours a day with that tissue ball or that paper ball. You're going to hit against the wall 5 hours a day, and you can get to that level. So you can make yourself anything that you want to be in life as long as you have that determination.
Yeah, no, I mean this is something I hear a lot with musicians actually, just as a tangent, and then I want to come back to some of the stuff you were mentioning about the budget because I agree and have some feelings about the budget. Um, Mark Knopfler wanted when the 1961 Fender Stratocaster came out on the market, it was a huge deal, and Mark Knopfler from the Dire Straits wanted to be able to play the electric guitar, the Fender Stratocaster. It's really a beautiful guitar. It is. But he didn't have the money to afford the guitar and an amp, so he just bought the guitar. And speaking, he didn't have an amp or anything, so he figured, how do we get a lot of sound out of this? So he started finger picking, and a lot of those kind of finger picking patterns turned into like Sultans of Swing and some of the Dire Straits' biggest hits, Money for Nothing. But um, it was just raw determination, like playing music 10 hours a day on his couch, just playing an electric guitar without a fucking amp, just because he wants it that bad, and
Gangster.
it turned into the Dire Straits. That's what it
Yeah.
takes, similarly, like the Eagles, Jackson Brown was living in a little flat beneath them in Kenny Rogers' house. So it was Kenny Rogers, the Eagles, and then in their basement, Jackson Brown. And every morning he would just wake up, play piano for like 20 minutes, make some tea, and then come back, play piano, and do that over and over for hours until he had a song. And then do that more and more until it was a hit. And then, all of a sudden he's in a band and now he's got, I don't know how many top 40 hits he's had, but, he's a, Hall of Fame songwriter, Hall of Fame musician, along with Kenny Rogers and the Eagles themselves. So it's just about determination. I see that with musicians a lot. Like, I mean, Slash from Guns N' Roses, 12 hours a day, growing up just playing guitar. Eddie Van Halen, the same thing. Um, Same thing from Jerry Garcia. All these great. That's what it is. It's that determination. But yeah, so the budget we need we need to talk about first of all baseline budgeting. We can't keep printing money every time we're irresponsible with our money, and also we can't keep raising the debt ceiling because at this point our largest bill on our docket every year is paying interest on our debt. If it's not there, it's getting very close. It's estimated by economists that in 2021, for sure, our biggest debt will be servicing our debt. That's our biggest bill. Our new biggest debt is servicing our debt. Similarly, over the last, since the 50s, the 60s, 70s, the 80s, the 90s, we've seen a rise in so much negligent spending where a pen could have been bought in a 12 pack at a Office Depot, but instead they're gold ballpoint pens that cost $100 each and a $50 bolt on the door instead of a $1 bolt. And the carpet installation company was very expensive, and Lockheed is a nice client to have, along with Raytheon and many other companies, right? So
Yeah.
number one, I think that I would like to see defense spending maybe about 2/3 of where it is right now. I think that's where I would be. That's where I would be comfortable. Any less, and I'd want to have a real conversation about where and who, realistically, and what we expect as far as do we want peace in certain countries or do we just want the power vacuum to? Because at some point, in theory, we could withdraw from everywhere, but that means there's a lot of places where, like Libya, where it's just a failed state. Gaddafi was taken out in 2012, and no one's been there ever since. It's just a state that's sitting there. They practice slavery. People go through there and go from Syria down through Libya, float over to Italy, and walk into Europe. So, at some point, it's also like how involved do we want to be or not want to be? I mean, Yemen's on the brink of war with Saudi Arabia, and for a while we've been involved with it, but we could not be involved. But then Saudi Arabia is just going to really beat on the people of Yemen hard. So it's like it's also like there's a case to be made where we have to honestly decide how much do we want to involve ourselves in other problems going around, happening around the world? Do we want to be a part of creating peace in Afghanistan with Taliban and the Afghani government, or do we not? And we can have that conversation. But if we just should know that whether we stay or go, there are consequences to either decision, and we should talk about them for sure. Number two, right next to our spending in defense, as far as you're talking about tax dollars, where your tax dollars are going, defense and entitlements ballooning. People
Wow.
during the coronavirus are making more to not work than in some cases than they were to work. My dad has coworkers who, through like a federal work program, get supplemental income, and they make more money working like 10 hours than working like 30 hours. So there's an incentive to just not work. That's where your tax money's going. So it's going to the military, to a lot of reckless spending at the bureaucratic kind of level with those nuts and bolts, literally. And then it's going to programs, where we've promised people a pension for being a firefighter or a teacher for a certain amount of time or a police officer for a certain amount of time. So realistically, we also have to talk about, I mean, pensions have really become a huge thing where we divert so much money that's taxpayer dollars just to promising people money in the future if they work now. And we have to have a real conversation about that. So and so I say this as someone whose great grandmother told Joe Biden to run for city council because they were in the same Catholic parish in the 70s. I know, this is not, I'm not, an anythingist, or I don't even feel like I have a party. I just think that we need to, number one, for sure, when it comes to the budget, talk about our defense and talk about our pensions and talk about how much money we're promising people that's not even earned yet, because the government's not a business. They don't raise any money. The only way the government gets money is by taxing us or winning a war. They don't raise money like Jamba Juice. They're not a business. They don't have a product.
Yeah.
We're the product. So we raise them the money. We go out and work, and then they get a little piece of it. And I want roads and hospitals, but I also want to be able to afford to make rent. So it's like, at some point, yeah, I mean, we have to talk about where our tax dollars are going. And people don't want to have that conversation, but I would love a model where it's totally transparent, where, like you're saying, we do get to choose where our tax dollars go. I would love
And
that. I would love to get to have a say in where my tax money's going, because I have ideas.
yeah, I completely agree.
Infrastructure, social workers, like, yeah, seriously, I'm all
I
about it.
I completely agree with you. I think that's such a big topic that we could talk about. We could go on for hours, but I feel as if you're not voluntarily giving your money to the government towards spending that you want it on, then you should not have to give it to it. Say you want to give money to firefighters, and
Sure.
say you have a fire. Say you have a fire and you don't give that money to firefighters. Hey, I think you should have to deal with it. But if you
Right.
give money to firefighters, you're voluntarily giving your money over. I personally would voluntarily give my money to firefighters. I
Same.
voluntarily would give money to police officers. And if it got cut, I would voluntarily give money to the post office. I would voluntarily do all this stuff. And I'm sure 99% of people would voluntarily do that because they want to be part of society. But those people that don't want to give money to schools, if they don't want to give money to hospitals, if they don't want to give money this, that's totally fine. But you don't get to use that service. And that's totally fine. That's not a big deal at all. But that's your decision at the end of the day. That's your voluntarily decision. And I think that if in elections, instead of choosing a certain candidate, if we chose, we want this, instead of, just checking off a little, we wrote in, hey, we want this, we want this. I think
Right.
that we would have the candidate that we want as a people, as a country. But I think that there's a lot of things that we have to go through different loopholes. And I think that's not going to be a way until at least a couple generations, because I feel like the American people are not ready for that. I feel like the American people don't have enough common sense to think that way. And I think that they think if it's not broken, don't fix it. But it's pretty broken. It's pretty done, the whole
Absolutely.
system.
Yeah, absolutely.
think I think that the people really need to rethink how we are living as people, and I think that they don't see that we are still, slaves to the system of the government. We get taxed. We have you go to work to go live in a house where you barely are at, and you have to make a car payment, and you're barely in your car, and it's just a rat wheel. Just keep going and going and going and going. But the elites don't have to do that. They're on vacation in Jamaica, Europe. They're on golf courses. Donald Trump's, playing some golf, and
Right.
he's hanging out, he's chilling. And but the rest of us, we're in this system that we're slaves to the system. I hate saying that, but 99% of people are. You know?
And most people are because they have to be.
Yeah.
Like, there's not an easy way. There's not an easy, immediate way out. and
No.
that's the thing that's concerning. And
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, when you talk about our educational system, I mean, the thing that we're really doing is priming people to make sure that they will be able to be compliant, compliant parts, if you cogs in the machine. We want to make sure that every single student coming through the system is going to be another brick in the wall. Because if not, that is going to potentially cause a disruption to the mindset that really does perpetuate the elites. And we could really get to the 8,000-pound word in the room, globalism, and talk about the sort of wealth and also terrible inequalities it's produced. But globalism is one of those things where it's produced a lot of wealth, but it's also produced a lot of terribly unsavory side effects for people in all sorts of countries. I mean, there are labor forces all around the world that have really really suffered at the hands of global forces. And in some ways, I know that there is a lot of emphasis for like a like a global a global kind of order, but also right, but also I don't know that we've ever I don't know if the human body is even really wired for something necessarily like that. Again, this is where the psychology might come in. I don't know what humanity looked like 100,000 years ago, but I don't think we've ever had just one extra, like governmental institution that's successfully managed the whole world. Um, and I'm very skeptical because things have certainly happened and are happening now, and they don't get mentioned or condemned. And even if they do, again, the Security Council system with the veto, so people just veto stuff, even if it's important to talk about, because they can. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure where to go. I think the question, though, is at this point, do we want a democracy? Because if we do, things need to change. I think things should change generally, but there's a specific kind of trajectory if we want a democracy for sure. And one part of me has such an appetite for just a clean slate. I want a clean slate either way. But I also watch people watch the news and it changes their whole world instantly, like on a dime, and it makes me quite scared of of just letting us all have that equal say, because it's like, oh wow, people can be very easily influenced, and it's concerning. So
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings, honestly, but I think that's what we're really wrestling with is, as far as the elites and stuff, do we want that democracy where it's like we really do, have more of an egalitarian thing, and through that system we kind of render elites obsolete. But I mean, do you trust all of your neighbors and everyone around you and in your school districts and everyone you've ever met in your life to really sit down, study things, think about it, and then go in calmly and coolly and make a decision? Or do you
No.
know, or do you know people that get on their phone and start immediately angry texting with you or whatever, angry DMing, and right? So it's like, I mean,
Let me ask,
yeah, please.
let me ask you this question: do people respond with emotion or logic 99% of the time?
I would say almost all the time it's just emotion, that automatic thought. Yeah, it's the emotion. It,
There's no logic.
right. It's not the higher abstracted part of you that is like weighing things and is trying to entertain an idea. It's that primal, deep, reptilian, gut instinct. People get short of breath, they sweat, the hands get shaky. I see it all the
The
time.
response.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell that people are having a visceral reaction to what's going on. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so
No.
so let me ask you something. When someone enters that fight or flight mode? I mean, how do you get out of it?
So that's that's your adrenaline setting in and your cortisol levels, all that
Right.
stuff going up. So all you can really do at that point is what you should do is to take a step back and really take some deep breaths, think
Okay.
about what's
Yeah.
going on. But people don't do that. People are not raised up that way. I'll say a lot of people, like I said, respond on emotions. So
Definitely.
um, I feel as if more people respond on logic. and really thought for themselves rather than just reading a tweet or reading a post and say, "Oh, I'm super angry about that. I'm gonna start, posting. I'm gonna start jumping on this train or this certain trend," and they do no research into it. And it's just that is why our nation is where it's at, because we do not do any research. We just jump the gun and we say, "Oh yeah,
Right.
that sounds right. That it sounds right to you because you're just using your emotion. You're not breaking it down. You're not
Right.
looking at it from a logical standpoint, and philosophical, standpoint or anything like that. You're angry. You're like, oh, and I hope the American people and the rest of the world could use more logic and really take some deep breaths, when they make certain decisions in the future.
I would agree, and I just would like to say, along with your point earlier about soccer, it's a lifestyle. So I just think that people generally, what I would like to see is more sensitivity and less reactivity, generally. And I think that people really are quite reactive and reactive, that being different, meaning that people will literally feel threatened and that limbic system will start going nuts and people will start shaking and they won't want to look at you in the face when they talk because they're worried or whatever. And it's a very weird thing, but you can tell when that feeling is setting in. It's very obvious. You wear it on your face. It's so familiar to me when someone is experiencing that. And I think that a lot of people in those moments, especially, instead of taking that as an opportunity to be like, let me slow down, let me recalibrate, let me figure this out, people might double down on whatever that assertion was. And we just get in this really weird, bitter tango. And people eventually just have a falling out. They're not friends anymore. They start talking less and less, sending each other. It's really sad to watch people block each other, remove each other online, or remove that connection, or take that person out of your life because they said one thing and you have deemed them forever unredeemable. That's another thing for me is the mob. You make one mistake and that's it. You're done. I have some friends online who, up until 5 minutes ago, loved Joe Rogan, and then all of a sudden, he's canceled. His soul is canceled. His existence is no longer real. And they act like they're God. Literally. It's like a complex. It's very concerning. This cancel culture we're in, where people just feel like, yeah, you said something I disagree with, so you're canceled forever.
You're blocked out of my life, and
I mean, could you
you're not.
imagine like trying to go into a marriage with someone who every time they have a problem or a conflict, they just try to remove that person or that situation from their life? How is that person
Yeah,
going to hold down a marriage? How are you
very
going
immature.
to how are you going to
Very.
be right? Like how are you going to expect how do you expect someone like that to be able to raise a child? The
Oh,
child's
there's
gonna
no
raise you. Yeah, like child's gonna raise
way.
you. Like there's no
Uh,
there's no way. So I get really concerned about in the future. I wonder what when this generation is old enough to raise their kids. What are what are the kids just gonna be born with the masks on already? You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I just
and if you don't wear your mask, that means you don't care about other people, so you're removed.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're removed. That's it. Like you don't have an option in this. There's no appeal process. There's no forgiveness or oh growth or oh you changed. Nope, that's it. You're just
Not our society anymore.
yeah.
So that might be a way to remove certain people from society who don't follow the trend. It's a
Yeah,
cancel culture.
it
Cancel
is.
culture.
It is. If you don't go with the mainstream dogma, and that's also another concerning thing. Just because I mean, Socrates was literally tried for telling people to question authority, and they said he was poisoning the minds of the youth, and so it was exile or execution, and he chose
Yeah.
execution. But I mean, all he did was tell people to question authority, and they literally tried Socrates. That's why Plato became a philosopher. The trial of Socrates. So I just think about that kind of stuff all the time, where I think, I mean, I wonder if Socrates lived today, if the same thing would happen. He would say something about the virus, and they would say, "You're canceled, Socrates, and all of your books be burned. Do a good old fashioned literature burn. Make sure he can't infect anyone else with his ideas about thinking critically for your own self. How dare he?"
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't that long ago that we literally put someone to death because they said, "Open your mind." So I'm just saying. I mean, it's concerning to me that we have that instinct still deep down inside, and it's very easy to just
And
jump on. Yeah, and I guess where I'd like to sort of end is, I mean, there's got to be some kind of need in that hierarchy of needs Maslow has, right? There's got to be some need that's being met, right? When people feel like they're in a group or they're in the in group, they're not the outsider. Is there some gratification to being the insider? Is it just a need to feel like you belong? What's going on there? I mean,
yeah, I mean, if you like, I think I touched on it before, but being the in-group member,
right,
if you see people on the outside group as not being part of you, so you automatically get defensive if they say something that is different of yours or something that is, a different idea or different value. And like I've said, I think people forget that people are unique. People are unique. You're unique. If you're male or female, you're unique. If you're white, black, Asian, Mexican, Portuguese,
right, we're all,
Italian,
yeah,
it's good to be unique.
it
It's a
is,
good to be unique
it is,
because when you bring all the cultures together, you all have something to bring to the table.
yep,
And I think that people forget that and people get angry. Oh, we all came from black people in Africa. That's a thing that we all came from. But it's
yeah,
great to bring all our cultures together so we can express our values and our certain, morals and all that. So we can exchange ideas and become a smarter species rather than just one race,
right,
controlling or
right,
or going to the top. If we thought that way rather than, oh, you're this race, so I don't like you because of this and this and this. Well, it's like, well, I didn't do that. I'm just trying to be as lovable as possible to everybody. I don't care, like I'm sorry about maybe things that have happened, but I'm just trying to put my best foot forward and trying to be the best person I can be. And if you put hate with hate, you're just gonna get more hate. But if we put love and love together, we're gonna just create more love for people. And I think that people forget that rather than trying to put down a certain race or a certain ethnicity or a certain man, woman, it doesn't matter what
right,
it is. By doing that, you're just going to create more and more chaos. And I think if people kind of, I guess, knew that, or I feel like people know that, but they just don't want to kind of admit it, I guess, in a way. It's like an ego thing. It's like, oh, no, 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 people, aren't like that. It's like, no, like, there's good people out there, and people that are shitty, they're shitty people. It's not because of their ethnicity. It's not because of their race. It's not because they're a man. It's a woman. They're shitty because they're shitty.
it's their
It
character,
has
yeah,
nothing to do with their
right,
and this is just it's a different topic, but like I just like I people are like surprised, because when I go out in the world, when I go train my kids at the parks, when I go coach, I talk to everybody. Hey, how are you doing? How are you doing today? Like, it's a beautiful out today, and my kids even are like, do you know him? And I'm like, no, I don't know him, but I'm just saying hi to everybody. By doing that, you're installing love within everyone. And so next time, that person might see someone who's not, the same skin color, maybe not the
yeah,
same
right,
ethnicity, maybe not same gender, it doesn't matter what it is. They'll install that love to the next group because if you give love in the world, you're going to get love back. If you give hate, you're going to get that hate right back.
yep,
So if people start giving more love in the world and they get off their high horse, their ego, their perception of the world, their subconscious, and really give love, I think that we could definitely turn this world around. And I hope that can happen. I really do. And when I have kids, I will, install these values and I want them to be open minded. I want them to be talking to everybody. It doesn't matter if you're, like I said, it
right,
doesn't matter what race, ethnicity. I want you to be nice to everybody. It doesn't matter. Everyone has their own battles, everyone has their own things going on in life. But at the end of the day, it doesn't take much to be nice. I feel like it's more effort to be a shitty person. You're
yeah,
just
no,
you're
right.
so up and so
No, I was just going to agree, and I think that when you look at the world, the random acts of kindness, and when people do put love in the world, when the love of power trumps that power, or when the power of love really overcomes that love of power, that's when things go well. And I think that that's what we need to learn. We need to go with into this century because, frankly, the 20th century was perhaps the bloodiest in recorded history, at least for quite some time. We had 2 world wars, Korea, Vietnam, a very long Cold War, a Maoist revolution, several revolutions in South America, and a Bolshevik revolution, followed by Stalin's Russia. And, again, the Holocaust in World War II. So the 20th century was maybe the bloodiest on record that
Yeah,
we know of. And I would like
yeah.
to make the 21st century much less bloody than the 20th century if we can. And
I'm on the
it's
same thing. Yeah,
and it's still very early, so I hope that we can do that before people lose faith, because that's when you've really, that's what I want to end on, but that's the worst. When people don't even have any, that's what I'm afraid of most right now, is that there's nothing that people have to believe in anymore. And when you are at that shitty job and you hate your life, but you have something to believe in, it keeps you going. So that's the one thing that really is unfortunate to see, is that so many people out there clearly are upset and they've lost faith in the government, their neighbors, institutions, maybe their coworkers or their employment, the systems. They're over it. And that's not a healthy place to be in if we want a democracy. It's got to be the opposite. People have to be jazzed about wanting to be in it if it's going to work well. So or work at all, I should say. So that said, it's still very early in this century, and I think that tide is turning. But I just think that the infinite push between the elites and the rest of us, who are fighting for the crumbs, that's always that definitely is something that is just more difficult to overcome. But I don't think it's impossible, and I think that if anything's worth fighting for, that's the hill to die on for sure.
yeah.
Like if there's any hill worth dying on, that's it for sure. Yeah. This is a
I
good place.
believe.
Yeah, this is a good place to end it. Well, thank you, Alex, so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. I love being on the show, Riley. We always have really good talks, deep talks, and I learn something every single time we have these shows. So thank you so much for having me on.
Same. You provide a lot of really, really interesting insight, especially right now with so much stuff that really does seem like it's got a root in psychology. And I think you are right. Right now, more than ever, we need social workers, psychologists, counselors, people who can deal with grief and with trauma more than ever right now, especially. So that said, everybody, thank you for tuning in to today's episode of The Riley Lewis Show. I always appreciate your time. If you'd like to support me, please hit that subscribe button down below. It helps me out a lot. You can also find me on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And again, you can like this video. There's a link in the description of my Patreon page, or you can find me on anchor.fm and go to my virtual wallet. Thank you, everybody.